machine would just eat up all of the lycra. Let's get sewing. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel La Fraise. Today we are starting my new project, the one that was the secret project I had talked about, and I'm actually starting a leotard for a friend who does ballet. And if you aren't interested in the vlog part of the video, go straight to the end. I'll put it in the chapters so you can go straight to the end to see the lessons learned, the pattern review and everything. Some of you know I have done ballet in the past. I mean, I did ballets for years and years and years, started at 4-year-old, but I no longer do ballet, but I have a friend who still does. And I really wanted to make a leotard to really stretch my sewing muscles and try something different and work with lycra. I have made swimsuits, but I feel like a leotard is a whole different beast. So I contacted her and I was like, weird question, but would you mind me making you a leotard? And she was super keen. We went together to the fabric store and she picked this lovely red fabric. So that's it, I'm starting now. I would say not starting on the best base, because for lycra, you would better use a mat and a rotary cutter. I don't have a mat or a rotary cutter, so I'm going to do it with scissors. But to make sure that nothing moves while I cut, I have pinned it. I have not just used weights, which I sometimes do, but I really pinned it because the fabric's gonna move when I cut. So there's a bit of a danger that the pins are damaging the fabric. I've tried to not put too many, to put them on the edges, but just so you know, if you are sewing with lycra, it's not really recommended to use pins and scissors. So already starting on a, you know, crafty, different way, but obviously I have to make it do with what I have. And also if you have lycra, make sure you use your stretch needles, and I'm gonna get cutting with this. So excited. Also, it feels like such a small project, like famous last words. I was going to be like, I feel like it's going to be quick. We're going to see. Obviously, it feels like a small in volume project and the seams are quite short, but I'm really curious to see how long it's actually going to take, if I'm going to be like in the end, oh my God, this was such a beast, or if it actually feels quite manageable. I will let you know, of course. Let's get sewing. I already want to show you. I tried to massage the fabric back into shape, but you can really see where the pins were. So truly, if you are using lycra, as few pins, such a shame, as few pins as possible, and really as close to the edge as possible. I think here wasn't close enough to the edge. I will do better for the next pieces. Here I massage it well. You can't really see the marks anymore, but the others, you definitely can see where the fabric was pinned. So already a first piece of learning with this. I also absolutely never follow the cutting plan from the designer, because what I tend to do is cut piece per piece, so it takes longer, but so I'm going to put a new fold for every piece. So it's not folded in the middle, it's folded closer to the side, and I cut piece per piece. And by doing like this, I save quite a lot of fabric, which means that in this case, because I did buy the recommended amount of fabric, but I am worried that maybe it's going to be too small or whatever, when she comes for the fitting, I should have left over to recut a piece or two if I need to. And yeah, in general, I just have tons of leftover and I can maybe squeeze an extra garment out of the fabric I have bought. So obviously it is longer, but I don't mind taking a bit longer. It's a hobby I enjoy doing, so it's not a race for me. So maybe something that you know, just food for thought, if you've never thought of it. Like, you don't have to follow the cutting plan. You can totally, there's a piece of fluff on my fabric, sorry. You can totally just fold as you go, piece per piece, and you will get so much more mileage out of your fabric and so much less fabric waste. So something to think about. Currently trying to cut without pins at all, not to sag my fabric, which means that I have to hold the fabric down as I go. I mean, hold the pattern piece down as I go. It's actually not going too bad. It's clipped on the folds, and here I just hold it as I go, and it's not going too bad. So potentially a winner here. Obviously this piece is it's the briefs, so it's quite easy to cut around. It doesn't have tricky bits, but yeah, to be seen what works best. I will say it at the end, or I will let you know what worked best once I figured it out. this is how much fabric I have left. So I bought the meter of fabric that they recommended in the pattern, and literally I have all of this left. It is literally 50 centimeters of fabric left. So actually I could have made it with like for half the price for the fabric. I can make her a second leotard. If the first one ends up being a disaster, I can fully remake it for her. Isn't that crazy? That's I feel like I really proven my point here. It's like, yes, it takes a lot more time, but so much more affordable to cut like that. The issue is that I never dare to actually buy less fabric than the recommended amount when I buy it. But for example, I have pens where I noticed I needed a lot less than what they asked for, and I have noted it in my trusty sewing notebook. And so when I go back to the fabric store for the same pair of pens, I actually know that I don't need exactly what they recommend in the pattern instructions, and I can just buy however I said to myself in the notebook. Oh, that sucks. I really thought I had stretch needles at home, but I have only ballpoint needles. I'm going to still give them a little test, but I think it's not going to work for the lycra. I think for lycra, you really need to go for a stretch needle. At least that's what the internet says. Internet says to give it a try with your ballpoint, so I will do that, but I really want this project to be nice, so I think I'll wait tomorrow and buy some stretch needles. It's alright. I can start cutting another project or sewing on something else. It's all good, but just like when you started, you're like, oh, I'm gonna start, and I kept all of the scraps because I want to try different options for the seams and see what I like best. So I've tried a bunch of stitches, and after trying a bit of everything, I think what's going to make the most sense, okay, sorry, everything's really wonky, but I was trying to look at the stitches mostly. I think what's going to make the most sense is the triple straight stitch and a zigzag on the edge. Yes, this is absolutely not straight, sorry, but... And for the edge, Sewn talks about the honeycomb stitch, which looks very nice, and performance-wise, I've kind of pulled on both that one and the zigzag. Sorry, it's so wonky again. I've tried both, and they seem to perform similarly, so I will see when I come to it which one I come to. It's true that it looks a bit prettier, doesn't it, compared to the zigzag, which also creates a little bit of tunneling, which this one doesn't do. I thought for a moment, I was like, maybe I should commit and actually put Wonder Tape or even like wash away stabilizer underneath this, just to make sure that the seam goes flat. Actually, it sews quite flat. It's after you pull it, so this I've pulled a ton, and like this I've pulled as well. And after you pull it, it gets really wavy, but I think it recovers okay, because now that I see it, it's still a little bit wavy, but it has kind of gone back. And I have pulled this with vigor and stretch. I find that the zigzag tends to pull the bottom a little bit more. I'll have to see. Maybe putting a bit of stabilizer just to make sure that we are really, really perfect would be good. Interesting so far, and the ballpoint needles for jersey work fine, I think, so I might get started today. Not gonna lie, feeling a bit nervous to start, but I know I have plenty of fabric left, so if it were to go really badly, I can probably recut some pieces and start again. So going to get going. Let's do this. Okay guys, as I'm making my leotard, I'm watching this video and I find it really, really compelling. I think it's a great message, and I'm going to put it again to the lovely viewer who told me to go and watch Sewn. Thank you. I'm religiously watching everything, and that video is really speaking to me so much, and I think it's an important message that many people should hear. So I'll put it in the description down below for you to go and see it. Thank God I have leftover fabric. I'm already going to have to recut the back piece. I tried to sew the first seam, so the back seam on the triple stitch. The pattern recommends to first do the zigzag on the edge and then to do the straight stitch, but I am thinking of doing the other way around. But I have run into problems. Oh, sorry, the fabric is so bright. My phone is absolutely struggling. I've really run into troubles at the start and then also at the end. Literally, really, the machine is like really, really struggling with the start and ends of those seams. I was like, well, I unpicked this once, but it was such a mess. I restarted, and then I was like, whatever, I'm going to sew this seam and see how it goes and, oh, come on, focus. Work from there. I have measured that I have the 6mm seam allowance that the pattern is calling for, and that worked really well, so I'm really happy with that. But yeah, I'm going to make the most of having this piece of fabric that's now ruined to test a few options and to see how I'm going to do the start and ends of the seams. Okay, I literally feel like MacGyver. I used a starter that's a t-shirt from a hen's weekend. You know, when you get those t-shirts that literally have the name of the bride on them, so I'm never going to be able to wear that again. So I don't fully understand how this works. I thought that the starter would need to overlap for it to really work, but no, look, it really makes a start, and then I cut a little bit more for the end, and now I just need to chop this bit off. I have backstitched all over back on this fabric and then back out, and yeah, that's super cool. That was a really easy fix, and that's going to be perfect for the rest of the seam. Now I need to recut this piece because I have Frankensteined it and recut this seam once to retry it. So I'm going to recut this piece and then we're back to business. I'm currently sewing the waistband, and no joke, I have to keep stopping and replacing the fabric because the top fabric keeps slipping away, and I really have to work really hard to keep them. See how the top here has slipped a few millimeters, so I'm gonna have to replace it, and I really have to go extremely slowly and keep replacing it because it slips non-stop. The armhole is no joke. I can't pin it, so I have clipped it to death, but otherwise it's going quite well so far. I mean, it's a bit hard to tell not on someone, but yeah, so far I'm quite happy, and wish me luck for the armhole. I've tried to put all of my threads, like my cut threads, on the fabric to show the point I wanted to make, which is the shop assistant who chose the thread for me in the store, I think chose a thread that's too orangey. To be fair, I think she had a tough job to do because the light in that specific store is really weird. But now the red of this, again, sorry, it's really tough for the phone to show this, but this is a really cool toned red, and this is a really orangey thread. And so far it's all construction, so it's fine. But when I'm going to do the hem on the sleeves and the elastics on the briefs, I think I want a thread that matches better. So today was Sunday and I'm constructing as much as possible, but I think I'm going to leave the bits that are really going to be visible for tomorrow, where maybe I can go to the store and get a better matching thread. You know, it's those small things that makes a difference between a really nice garment and a okay garment. Okay, I washed my hair, so you'll have to excuse the wet hair. I wanted to quickly chat while I pin the bias binding onto this skirt. So last Sunday, my friend came to try her leotard on, and it was really fun. I had left the leotard in 3 pieces. So I had the top piece, the midriff, and then the bottom, like the briefs, all separately. And I kind of put everything on her because the triple stitch is such a bleep to unpick. I was like, I don't want to sew those pieces together and then realize it does, like, one doesn't fit. Also, I was like, if I have to remake one, it's going to be easier to remake it at this point when it's still like early on and easy to fix than, you know, if I realize once I've sewed everything that there's an issue. I need to think for 1 second to not make a mistake. Okay, back to business. I was thinking which way around I needed to put this bias tip. So she came to try on the leotard. It went really well. I was so worried because it looked so extremely tiny, but really once you put it on her, I mean, the magic of lycra, it stretches so much, and so it stretched and it fit her perfectly, so it was really nice. The only thing that I had to modify was the elastics, and that's always the thing with elastic. They give you an elastic measurement, but if your elastic is a little bit sturdier or a bit harder than the one they use, it could end up being too tight. So the length they suggested was a little bit tight because it kind of like made a line in her bum cheek, which is not very good looking. So we added a little bit more room in the elastic, and it was really nice. It was good because she had a lot of time, so she stayed while I sewed. So basically we tried everything on. I sewed one bum cheek of the elastic. She tried it on, confirmed, went to the other one. I did it as a zigzag, so it was less of a pain if I had to remove it than if it had been the triple stitch like I did the rest of the leotard. And then I have images, so I will put the image on top while I talk. She really liked that stitch, which looks a bit like a ear of corn, or you know, an ear of wheat. So this is the stitch I used because she found it pretty, and I was also very happy with how it looked. I checked everything, and then she left, and after she was gone I finished the last little bits of the leotard. There wasn't much left to do, so I just hemmed the sleeves and put the 3 different pieces together, and then it was done. And she's coming tomorrow, so it's Saturday today, and she's coming tomorrow on Sunday to try the leotard for a final time. So this is very, very exciting. I hope it's going to be a success. So I'm still doing another 2 things for her. This is a ballet skirt. We were at the fabric store to pick up the lycra for her leotard, and then she saw this and she was like, can you make me a skirt for ballet? Kind of like having no idea if this fabric would be optimal for it or not, but we were like, well, it flows nicely, it should work. So we picked this up. The day she came to try her leotard, she also brought her existing, like the ballet skirt she already uses. And I kind of just put the skirt on top of the fabrics, put pins all around, and then when she left, I cut the fabric following the pins that I had placed on the fabric. So it was definitely a bit of a crafty cut. Didn't follow a pattern. I just kind of copied her skirt because she liked the shape of it. Even at the fabric store, we kind of had no clue how much fabric we had to buy. We kind of just looked a bit at the length of her leg and we were like, yeah, about that much, that'll be fine. In the end, I needed quite a bit because the way the skirt is on the fold, so the fold would be here, but then the skirt would kind of go like this following the fold. So I had to use quite a bit of fabric, but it was all good. And I have been doing a ton of thinking about how to hem this skirt, because for having done a little study on ballet skirts, most of them are just overlocked and that's it. So the overlocked edge is the one visible on the side, and I don't find this particularly neat. I also don't have an overlocker, so I would have had to find one, which would have been a challenge. I mean, it would have been fine, but you know, I also just found that just leaving the overlocked edge was not super premium looking. And other skirts have, I don't know if they're burned, I think it looks more like they're cut and then there's maybe a thin layer of glue or anti-fray on the edge, and that's all. And again, I was like, it doesn't look very premium. So I looked at how you hem bridesmaids or prom dresses. You know that like baby hem, when you fold it so very near the edge, refold. I mean, if you know the bridesmaid prom dress type of hem, this is what I did. I tried it on a little scrap of this fabric. It looked like it was taking a sharp curve quite well, because if you look at how sharp this curve is, really it's curving quite aggressively. So I looked, it seemed like it was going to be totally fine. So I was very happy. And so I went for it with this skirt. I pressed it well. And honestly, it does wave a bit, like with such a sharp curve. I was really worried by how much it would wave. I really, really try not to stretch the edge as I was doing it. And I have a little bit of wave, but honestly, while being worn, it's more of almost a tulip effect. Like, I think it looks fine when worn. I was really worried that it would be much worse than this. Okay, I'm ready to sew this, but I quickly want to share the little drama I had with the ribbon. We took this ribbon to put as the top of the skirt and also the tie so that you can tie it. And I don't know, the color's not really great, I'm sorry, but this is exactly the same tone of blue as the skirt itself, and it was great. But while at the fabric store, we kind of eyeballed how much we would need, not really realizing that a ballet skirt, you have it at the back, at the front, again at the back, and then tied around you. So the ribbon needs to go twice around you and then again enough to make a pretty bow. And I didn't realize how much that would represent. Even though she has a tiny waist, you still need to fit it twice around her. And I looked and I was like, okay, I would need 70 centimeters to make a pretty bow, and I had 50. And I tried to do a bow. I'll try to put all of the photos of everything on the screen as I talk. I had 50 centimeters and honestly, it was not giving a really pretty bow. So I went back to the fabric store and they were out of this one. So I was like, it's fine, I'll buy this one. Again, I'll put photos this way you can see better, but like not a very different blue. But I was quite upset that it was not the right blue. I was like, if I had not known that there was the other one, would have been fine. I was like, okay, do I put a little bit of this one at the back and use the dark blue at the front? But I felt like it was a bit crafty. And then I came back home. I was really, really unsure, keep thinking about it. Like, again, it's not a real problem in my life. Sometimes having to think about my crafty issues is a nice break of real life issues. Don't worry, I'm fine. But yeah, I was really like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Because my friend was like, please don't make yourself sick over the ribbon. And I was like, I'm not making myself sick. I just want it well done. I'm sure you guys can understand. And I was like, I'll go back to the fabric store and I'll buy the one that's twice the size because they still had the one that was twice the width. And I'll just cut it and press it myself. And then I thought, actually, I'm going to call and I'm going to ask if they're going to have more in the future. And they were like, oh, we have absolutely no clue when we have the next delivery for the bias. So what you could do is buy it online because the other store in Belgium has it and so they deliver it in store. So I did this order for 1 meter of this bias for 80 cents. 80 cents, it was delivered in store so I didn't have to pay shipping. And then I went in store to pick up my order and they had this back in stock. I was like, this is just so silly. But well, I went to pick up my 80 cents order. I have attached, so now I have way too much bias, like those are way too long, but my plan is to sew it, to leave the ends unfinished, and then when my friend comes we tie the bow and we decide how long they need to be. But this way now they are too long and I have the luxury of choosing what size works and what is pretty, and at least it's not too little. So all that to say, I went to that store a million times it seems to get the perfect ribbon, but I think it really makes it worth it. I think it's really the right color for this project. So yeah, so that's it. I'm now going to sew this bias on. Gonna see how pretty that's going to be. I'll obviously show you once it's done. Then once the bias is on, I need to actually get moving, otherwise I'll never finish. I'm making a pole dance outfit for her because she's like, oh, blah, but there's this pretty fabric. And so yeah, she's doing pole dance now. So I'm gonna cut and sew hopefully everything today because she's coming tomorrow morning. It's quite small pieces, so I hope that it's gonna be fine. But yeah, need to stop talking and start moving because there's a fair amount of work to do actually. So the reason why I'm not finishing, so look how pretty. Look how pretty this is. I'm so happy and I'm glad I fought for this bias so that it would be the right one. I'm very, very pleased. I have sewn the bias down 50 centimeters. The reason why I have not done it all the way to the end is that I want for the actual end of the bias to fold it the wrong way around, sew a little line here, cut the excess, turn it back, and then it's a very neat end here, and then I'll sew the rest. And this way you don't have the thing where at the end either you have to refold it and it's a bit awkward, or maybe you just leave it or whatever. So folding the wrong way around, little line of sewing, and then it's super, super neat. I find this extremely satisfying. So yeah, just so you know, that's why I'm leaving a little bit of margin, and obviously this is going to take no time to sew when she's there. She's going to be able to go home with her skirt. So altogether, this project cost about, I don't know if it was 32 or 34 euros, but so quite affordable for a leotard and the skirt. That includes the fabric, the bias tape and the thread, blue thread and red thread. I haven't counted here the new red thread I had to buy. I haven't counted the pattern or the needles either. So for the pattern, we used the Emma from Jalie, and I was really happy with the fit. When I measured my friends against the table size from Jalie, it was a bit weird because Jalie really drafts for people that are quite straight up and down, and my friend is very petite, but the difference between her bust and her waist is quite dramatic. So the way Jalie drafts things, it's basically for someone that does not have a very big difference between bust and waist. Now, because it was a leotard, I was like, there's no point trying to grade things and maybe make it so that it would be too short as well in the length, because even though she has a tiny waist, she still has the length here. So I decided to go fully with the size 34 from top to bottom. It was indeed a little bit more roomy at the waist. It just meant that the fabric wasn't taut there, but honestly, I think it was easier for me to sew everything in the same size. It fit her fine, so I think that was quite a good call to have done that. She was really the size 34 on the top and the hips, and just the waist was a different size. So I just glossed over it and didn't do anything about that. I would like to mention that Jalie's sizes are a little bit annoying. I mean, they're not annoying, but they're a bit confusing. So you have the body measurements, and that's fine, obviously you compare against that, and they have their own Jalie size, which is a letter, which I think you could just stop there, it would be fine. I find it really clear when it's like A, B, C, D, blah blah, and you just pick the right letter. Perfect. But they also have the size XS, S, M, L, XL, etc. And then they also have the European size 34 to 36, 38, and they match all of that. Except that the way they match 34, 36, 38 does not actually match what it means in S, M, L, XL, etc. So if you think, oh, I'm normally, like for example for myself, because I also cut a top from Jalie for myself, I was like, oh, I'm normally an M in the top. But because of the way they have done it, then I become an S, and it just makes it more confusing than anything. If you're not going to make them match as it should, just forget about the traditional sizing, and the traditional sizes have your size chart, your letter, and stop at that, because I thought it was a bit too much, because it also meant like there were 3 layers of sizes. There was the S, M, L, the 34, 36, 38, and then their own size letter. For me, it was too much. I don't really understand the thinking behind it, especially if it doesn't match what we normally match with those sizes. So it obviously doesn't change anything about your sewing experience. It's just the first little like thing I thought that was not optimal in the leaflet. Another note for Jalie, for the leotard specifically, and this is not for the leotard here, but I also have the pattern for the leotard 3349, so that's another leotard, but if you use several of the patterns for leotard, in the 3349 there is I think a mistake in translation, because in English, so I will explain how I did the seams later, but in English they explain, well, if you don't have a serger, you do a zigzag on the edge and then a straight stitch. In the English one they say you pull your fabric so that your straight stitch has enough elasticity in it. The French translation says specifically, don't pull your fabric so that it stretches. So in English it says pull the fabric, and in French it says exactly the opposite. Do not pull the fabric so it stretches. So it means that if you follow the instructions in French for that leotard, you're going to not pull your stitches, and then afterwards they're not going to be stretchy, because a straight stitch on lycra is going to be a disaster. So watch out for the little mistake in the pattern here. And I feel like for this pattern has been out for so long, and it's a digital pattern, so I think they're quite easy to correct, so would be nice if they corrected that. But I'll come back on the stitches a little bit later on when I talk about the fabric. So going back on the fit was really good. I just added a few centimeters in the elastics that are going around the bum and thigh. And for me, the elastic length that they originally gave was a little bit too tight, and I think it's much nicer if your bum cheek is not kind of like cut in the middle. So I made sure that we tested the elastic beforehand, before I sewed it into the leotard, and we saw that she needed a few extra centimeters, and that's something I recommend, to always test your elastic before you sew it in, because once it's sewn in, it's going to be such a nightmare to remove. But that I really don't hold it against the pattern maker and the pattern design, because honestly I think it's quite difficult to recommend an elastic size and an elastic length when really every elastic is a little bit different, and they might have more or less give into them. So depending on which elastic you use, you know, it's really better to try it actually on the person and not just follow the elastic requirements. If you are doing a leotard with Jalie, be careful, the seam allowance is very small, it's 6 millimeters. That's 1/4 of an inch, so that's really not much room. So when you are marking your notches, I normally cut them in, but here it's really the moment to make a little triangle on the outside. If you cut them in with a 6mm seam allowance, you need to make a really small notch for it not to go into your seam. So it's going to be much easier to actually do a triangle going outwards, and then you can even cut it after you've sewn your seam if you want it really neat. So that's something I really recommend with such a small seam allowance. Don't cut your notches in. So last point, I wanted to talk about the pattern itself. Was it quick to sew? It wasn't so quick because it was the first time I was making this pattern. I was still discovering how it worked and everything. But I feel like if I had to make it a second time, especially for this same friend, because I know her measurement and I know how everything fits for her now, it would be quite quick. A leotard is not a very big project. It's not like a skirt when you have a ton of hem to do. It's lycra, so you basically don't have to press it ever. So I don't think I went that fast making this project, but I do think that leotard can be a really quick project to make. Okay, so I would like to move on to the fabric, so working with lycra, and the very first thing I would like to say is don't use pin. Don't use pins. I have used pins to start the cutting process, and honestly you could see marks everywhere I left the pins. It was kind of a disaster. I tried to massage it back into the fabric to make the little marks go away. They didn't go away, so in the end I totally got rid of the pins. For sewing, I used a ton of clips if I needed them. I just used clips, or I just didn't use anything, or just one clip at the start maybe, or one at the end. I just went slowly, matched my notches as I went, and it was alright. So I think if you go slow and steady, you can make it work without pins. And to cut my pattern pieces, I also did without anything in the end. I mean, the ones that were on a fold, I could use a few clips on the folds, but the ones that were in the middle of the fabric, I just used nothing. I sometimes put my phone in the middle of the piece to have a bit of weight. I just cut extremely slowly around the piece, and that was it. I mean, if you go slowly, you really hold the paper against your fabric, you can make it work, and I promise it's really worth it, because pins are going to leave marks in your fabric. Again, if you had a wider seam allowance, it would be fine because you could leave that in the seam allowances. But as my seam allowance here was 6mm, there was just no room to leave those pins. So no pins, but you'll be fine. Just go slow and steady. I promise I have cut the whole leotard like this, and you can totally do it. Obviously, if you do have a rotary cutter and a cutting mat, this is my no. If you have a rotary cutter and a cutting mat, this is the moment to get them out. Like, this is absolutely the moment to use them with weights to keep your patterns down. This would be perfect. I have only scissors, so I made it work with scissors, and you can totally make it work with scissors too. But if you have a rotary cutter, you will find cutting your lycra much easier. So for the stitch I used a triple straight stitch and then a zigzag on the edge. I think it gave a really nice finish. I was really thinking, okay, I don't have an overlocker. Again, if you have an overlocker, it's going to make your sewing lycra life a lot easier, I think. But honestly, I was super pleased with the final look of those seams. I thought it looked really nice. Jalie recommends for you to first do the zigzag and then do the straight stitch. And they tell you not triple straight stitch like I have done, but they say use a straight stitch and you pull your fabric as you sew. I thought it made a lot more sense to do a triple straight stitch, which is a stretch stitch. I have a very basic machine and it has it, so it's very likely your machine is going to have it too. And that stitch allowed to have a lot of stretch in my seam. I preferred doing the triple straight stitch, oh my god, I said that 5 times quickly, the triple straight stitch first and then the zigzag, because when you sew a zigzag stitch, it tends to stretch your seam a little bit. So having first the triple straight stitch allowed me to sew my seam without it stretching, and then I could overlock with the zigzag on the edge, and it wouldn't matter if it stretches maybe a little bit on the ends, because at least the whole seam wouldn't stretch. So I'm not fully sure why the pattern wanted you to do differently, to do the zigzag first, and also why they would tell you to do a straight stitch on a stretch fabric even if you pull the fabric. I don't know, I was not fully agreeing with the construction for the no serger option, so I really liked my method, and feel free to use it if that works for you as well. The thing is, with the triple straight stitch, it was really hard to start the seams because the machine would just eat up all of the lycra. It would like kind of get pulled in the hole where the needle goes. it was a bit of a mess. So what I ended up doing was using a starter to start my seams. So I had an old t-shirt or any piece of sturdy fabric that you have is going to work perfectly. I used that to start the seam, go back stitch a little bit and then come back. And it worked really well. Honestly, the starter saved my seams. Before I used the starter, it absolutely didn't work. At some point, I started another project with lycra and I was like, oh, it's probably gonna be fine. Feeling too lazy to use the starter. I had to recut every single piece I tried to sew with this project because one, the machine ate up all of the lycra, and second, it's impossible to unpick a triple straight stitch. It's just a beast to unpick. Like, if you have to unpick it, I'm sorry. I basically did not manage. You have some of the thread that's so mixed into your fabric, I could not even find where the thread was, and the pieces I have managed to unpick, they were so damaged from unpicking that they were basically unusable. So triple straight stitch, go really slow, sew very slowly because you don't want to make a mistake, you don't want to have to unpick it. Hopefully you have a little bit extra fabric if you need to recut pieces like I had to do, but the starter has really been a god save. And honestly, I know it feels like more work, and that's why I try to get away with not using it, but it really doesn't take much time to use a starter. You just cut it afterwards and it's done. So it was really worth it. It made all the seams really neat. Sew very slowly, not only because, as I said, the triple straight stitch is very difficult to unpick, but also lycra moves quite a bit when you sew. And if you have moments where you want to just baste things together, you're going to do that with a zigzag, and the zigzag stitch tends to make things move this way. So your top layer is going to kind of move away from the bottom layer, and you're going to have to keep putting it back constantly. Again, you can't really pin things, so even with the clips, it doesn't stay where it should. If you're going too fast, your pieces are going to end up totally unmatching. So go very slowly, and every few centimeters, put it back together nicely on top of one another. You'll see with the lycra, it's not very long seams, but if you don't go slow and steady and very carefully, you're going to have to unpick everything. It's going to be a mess and you're going to regret it. You're going to spend a lot more time unpicking than you have been sewing that seam in the first place. So sewing slowly, I'm going to shout it everywhere. Sew slowly with lycra is really, really what's going to help you. I had read online that to sew lycra you really need stretch needles. However, I did not have them on hand. I had jersey needles. I have tried them on my fabric and it worked perfectly. So I would say if you are going to buy needles for your project anyway, buy stretch needles. If you are on a Sunday, the shop is shut, and you have jersey needles on hand, try them on a scrap of fabric. I'm not promising it's going to work, but it did work for me and it allowed me to start with my project. So for me, the jersey needles worked great, but apparently it kind of depends on your fabric. So give it a little test. And testing is kind of the last words I want to leave you with sewing with lycra and sewing a leotard or other dance outfits. Test your needles, test the different stitches you are going to use. For example, for the top stitching, when I sewed my own swimsuit, I used a zigzag stitch as a top stitching and I found it really nice and it was no problem. I then watched the videos from Steph Sewn and she recommends a honeycomb stitch. I also tried it, I found it really pretty, but then when I showed kind of all of my test of the different stretch stitches to my friend, she saw that little ear of corn stitch. I'm not sure of its exact name actually, but she really liked it and I was like, sure, I can do the top stitching in that. So when I sewed the elastic, I first went with a zigzag to sew the elastic on the first side, and then when I folded it over, I used that little pretty stitch that she liked, the little ear of corn stitch. I had tested it, I saw it worked, so test your needles, test your stitches, also test the elastic length before you sew them in. You'll thank me later. And yes, I realized I didn't show you the outfit. I'm very sorry. This is the outfit. This is my friend wearing her new leotard. I am so extremely pleased of how it turned out. Honestly, I kind of didn't expect it would look so nice. There's also a true moment of magic when you have so I had the top, the midriff and the briefs, and they looked a bit small and nothing looked like it would work together. And then once everything was sewn together, obviously with the stretch of the fabric, it just came together and worked beautifully, and it was really, really nice to see it on her. If while you're sewing your project you feel like it's way too small, don't despair. Maybe it's going to be the right size, because once it's all together, it really comes together nicely. So yeah, I was super happy with the result. She was really pleased too. So it was all happiness all round. I realized I have not talked about the skirt, but I talked about the skirt a lot in the vlog section of this video, and I don't have much to say. We just saw this fabric, thought it was really nice. I have done a prom/bridesmaid dress hem, so like a mini hem on the edge of the skirt. I thought that it was the option that would look the most premium, and I have put bias tape around to do the binding and the ribbon to tie the skirt up. And I have to say, I'm kind of amazed by how well the skirt turned up. I didn't expect it to look that nice, so I was super pleased of how pretty it looks. And I didn't use a pattern for this, I just used the skirt she had at home and I cut around that, so just so you know. If you want to hear more talking about the skirt, go in the video and go and watch the vlog part of the video. The last thing I kind of wanted to leave you with, and that's going with the sizing of Jalie. If you've watched the vlog part of this video, you'll know that I had done the leotard for my friend and I had started a pole dance outfit for her as well. So what I had prepared for when she came for the fitting was, well, she had all the leotard and skirt and everything, but then I had the briefs ready without the elastics to try the elastics on her, and I had this ready. And this is the top, and it's just missing the bottom band that would go under her breast and, you know, kind of like cinch the bust in and make sure that nothing falls out. This is the same size, so same brand. This is also a Jalie pattern, same brand, same size as the leotard. And her chest does not fit in this. So width-wise, we have the right width, and that makes sense because we have measured her and this is the right bust width for her size. I knew that I would need to take the underband in by quite a bit because obviously she's very narrow here, and I was like, it's fine, I'm cutting the band as it is in the pattern, and then when she comes I'll, you know, take it in at the right size and we'll make the elastic the right size. It's going to be fine. It was not safe for children, let's say it that way. We were missing a whole 5 centimeters of fabric here so that it would cover her bust fully. 5 centimeters. So I'm going to do a full bust adjustment. So if you are interested in seeing a full bust adjustment in a bikini, so there's a princess seam going on here, if you can see that. So if you are interested in full bust adjustment, and when I mean full bust adjustment, I mean at least 2 cups, I think, increase in this top. That's going to come in a future video. I need to get working on that. So yeah, it's not like Jalie didn't explain it. Obviously, it's clear from the size chart that they're drafting for someone that does not have a big cup, but I wish they had a little bit more cup in the pattern, because maybe with the stretch it would have worked, and here it did not work at all. So that is for the pole dance outfit. That's coming in a future video with an interesting, hopefully, video about full bust adjustment on a bikini. So, and yeah, I think I have mentioned everything I wanted to say. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was interesting and that you learned something and maybe realized that you can also sew swimwear. I mean, I already talked about swimwear in my Sandpiper review video, but you can sew swimwear, you can sew dancewear, and maybe things you less often think about when you think about sewing. If you want to see that full bust adjustment on the pole dance outfit one day, please subscribe, like this video if you liked it, and don't forget that you can make anything, including fun things with lycra, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!